So this week was the first week that we got temperatures above 85 degrees truly for a few days. And if you notice behind me, these trees kind of have a grayish look to them. That is because we put something on them, spray something on them it's a liquid, but it is mined out of the ground. It's actually called calcium carbonate. And we spray it on there and it acts as a reflective film on an apple. And it reflects the light. It helps, so for people that know, the darker a color is, the more light it absorbs. So if you paint things white or put a white protective film on them, it reflects the light, therefore keeping the apple a little bit cooler. And the reason why we're doing this is because at temperatures above 85 degrees, the surface of the apple starts getting hot and then creates sunburn. So we're using it to help us protect against sunburn. These are Cosmic Crisps, so in my experience with them as a consultant and growing them, they do sunburn, but a lot of times that sunburn colors over, although that piece of fruit that got sunburned a lot of times will end up mealy at the end of the year and not a super well desirable eating piece of fruit. So we put this cover on to protect them from that. It comes off to the touch, and we got some overhead cooling on this block too, so once we start overhead cooling it, some of it washes off. But the goal is right now to just cover up the piece of fruit and not have to overhead cool, because the more you overhead cool, there's just a lot of other things that make stuff muddy. And for example, these Cosmic Crisps, we don't really put much nitrogen on them because of something called green spot, which is a calcium deficiency. And when your balance of calcium to nitrogen so when you put water on organic material, microbes in the soil start converting organic matter to nitrogen, and the trees use, so organic matter meaning like the grass we mow, the trimmings from prunings, all that stuff over the process of years. Once you start making it wet and making it a symbiotic or a great place for without being anaerobic, so without oxygen, a great place for microbes to live, we'll start converting that organic material to nutrients that a plant can use, which we use a lot. We use those microbes for good, but in this case, the later we can be with our water overhead cooling, the better we are. So I put this on. Yeah. So when a lot of times too, that's like when you never see this when you get to the store, because when an apple gets picked, it goes through a higher acidic. It goes through an acidic tank wash. Acidic meaning they acidify the water just a little bit, and it helps take this film off even better, more so. But I mean, a brush will just take it off pretty easily. I mean, it won't take much, but and sometimes you'll even see it. So like if you buy a Cosmic, a really dark Cosmic, you'll see it in the stem bowl. It's hard to clean out an apple all the way. So sometimes when you buy a piece of fruit and you look at it and there's a little bit of white in the stem bowl, that's what you're looking at. We use it just to, it's not harmful pesticides, it's just what we're using to help us with sunburn. So anyways, yeah, we're kind of in that stage right now. We're kind of past the set stage. Cosmic Crisp like to self-thin / not set. So your traditional varieties like Galas and Goldens and Red Delicious and Granny Smith, Granny Smith too, but we chemically thin those with lime sulfur or other chemicals to thin down the fruit to the crop load that we want. These apples, we don't do any of that stuff. They thin themselves. A lot of people are still trying to figure out exactly how, what things influence it. A lot of people say pollen, which I agree with. I think pruning has things to do with it, the way you prune them and stress them, and honestly the training systems in them too, whether it's a V trellis or an upright trellis. Just a lot of different influences, and everybody's, it's like many things in life. There's 99 ways to do something. Generally, apples flower in 5. Sometimes there's 6 flowers in a cluster. So this, when I say a cluster, this is what I mean, a cluster. So there's 5 flowers usually that come out. And I think it's been mentioned. The center one is called the king. That's the one that usually pushes out first. And these other 4 blooms, 3 or 4 blooms, they're called I usually just call them sides. And when I was talking about chemically thinning, so when we're chemically thinning something like a gala or a granny, for example, which there's a granny pollinizer tree just literally 2-3 trees down from me. We want the king bloom because generally the fruit's larger. It has think of it as like a highway, whereas you're taking like a road. You're taking the direct route to the store, or taking the street down the road and then making an alternate route to get to the store. If you're going to go to the store, you want, with like a gala, a granny, a golden delicious, you want that direct route. So you want that piece of fruit that's getting the most, nutrients, water, and that generally is your kingdom. With things like Honeycrisp, Cosmic Crisp, we tend to like, well, Cosmic Crisp still is kind of, I think the jury's out on it. Because there's not really much problem when it comes to fruit size conventionally. Organically, some guys are struggling with fruit size just because there's a lot less tools that you can use. But conventionally, I'm fine with either a king bloom or a side bloom. But for example, on the Cosmic Crisp, like I was saying earlier, there's not, people are kind of, they have their own different ideas of why this variety just doesn't set fruit. So when I'm saying set, meaning actually setting a piece of fruit, the fruit is getting pollinized and it's saying, hey, I'm going to be a piece of fruit, I'm not going to fall off. And so for example, looking at the ground, these are all pieces of fruit. So here's a small piece of fruit that aborted. There's a medium-sized piece of fruit. So these are all coming off the apple, and we didn't do anything chemically to knock these off. Even this large piece of fruit. So that just shows you the sizes of piece of fruit that are falling off of this tree, just because the tree is not setting it. We're not doing anything to it with any chemicals or anything like that. It's just, that's the way this variety acts. And it tends to single itself out. So here, which is kind of wild in some cases. I mean, some guys have problems setting a bunch of fruit. I mean, this is particularly, this tree looks pretty set. I mean, even the tree next to it's got some doubles and stuff in it, but for the most part, this variety likes to single out. So if you zoom in or come and look at this piece of fruit, there's still some old, looking at it, there's still some old, let's get the leaf out of the way, but there's still some old apples that are still hanging on that have yet to fall off, but those aborted so that this guy could take over. And this guy was probably the king. If you actually look right here, this little dot, that right there is called, that's where the fruit abscizes. So on a piece of fruit, when we're chemically thinning, or when we're trying to pick a piece of fruit, there's a layer of cells that connects the stem to the apple to the tree through the stem. They're called abscission cells, and certain things influence ethylene. So when the fruit, later in the year, when we're about ready to harvest it, the fruit naturally creates ethylene, and it tells those abscission cells to start dying. So therefore that piece of fruit gets looser. We could do it chemically too by adding certain PGRs that stress the tree out, that says, hey, that's kind of what we're doing with chemically thinning, whether it's lime sulfur or other chemical tools. We're telling the trees, hey, we're going to stress you out. You have too much fruit on you. You need to get rid of some of your fruit and hold on to some, but get rid of the others, because what people might not know, and it's a lot of the backyard farmers don't know this, but you got to get rid of your fruit. So if you don't have resting spurs on your fruit, so resting spurs meaning this year, so I'll pull one off. So this year there was a flower on this piece of fruit right there. These were all flowers, but all the pieces of fruit fell off. This spur right here, like we're trying to get the same thing out of it with chemicals, trying to get it to shell its piece off, shell that fruit off, so that next year that spur will have a piece of fruit on it, because you killed the fruit off of it, or told the fruit, you didn't kill the fruit, you told the fruit, or told the tree to abort some of that fruit. If you do that early enough, you're creating what's called return bloom, and this is a long topic of discussion what return bloom is, but in Cosmic Crisp, things that there's varieties that don't return bloom. There's just a lot of different things. But anyways, that's what Cosmic Crisp do. But yeah. Anyways, we got the grape, updates on the grape trails. We got those up. The plants are growing well. We're working on fertilizer. I'm hoping to get a fertilizer video of like how I inject fertilizer, what I'm using, what I'm doing, how we do it, and just kind of, it'd be cool to show you guys like we take like a daily picture and run like a quick montage of like how fast our grapes actually grow. So like today it was 90 degrees, and I bet you wouldn't believe how much a grape can grow if you give it water and fertilizer. I mean, in probably the span of 2 days we'll get a foot of growth, which might be crazy. I mean, I've seen corn do that too, when you got hot heat, but yeah, the grapes like the heat. Apples not as much, but I mean, there's other factors in apples that we like the heat for, so it kind of slows down the terminal growth. See how this terminal is shut down? Heat slows them down. We also use a couple of chemicals that help slow the growth down. Because, on the contrary, going back to sunburn to wrap up this conversation, in the fall when it starts getting cooler, we kind of want that sun to come back so we can get color back to our fruit. So having a bunch of extra growth around our apples might not broke it off, helping myself some of them, but having a bunch of extra growth like this during the summertime is not necessarily a fantastic thing, because it inhibits color later in the year. So a lot of guys will come through and prune out all these shoots later in the fall, but we use a chemical, it's got a bunch of different names, but the active ingredient is prohexadione calcium. It is a PGR, plant growth regulator, that slows down growth in apples and pears. I use it in apples, pears, cherries. Well, not pears. People don't use it in pears very much, but I want to try it on our own at some point. But anyways, yeah. So stay tuned in. Thanks. Whoa, Jake, what's that white stuff on the apple? Oh, hey, is it gonna mark a fruit? No, it just comes off.